Всем привет, and welcome back to our podcast, Frenemies or Sister Nations, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. If we really want to understand modern Russia, we can't just start with the Soviet Union or the Romanovs. We need to take a step back, way back, and look at the long arc of how power has been built, lost, and rebuilt again. Because Russian history isn't linear. It moves in cycles, shaped by dramatic moments and strong personalities who redefine the state every time a crisis hits.
Exactly. After the fragmentation of Kiev and Rus and the Mongol domination, Moscow slowly emerged as a new center of gravity. Figures like Alexander Nevsky embodied a strategy of survival: resist Western pressure but pragmatically accept Mongol rule to preserve Orthodox identity. This instinct, protect sovereignty at any cost, later evolved into a centralized autocracy under Ivan III, who broke from Mongol tribute in 1480. And from that moment, Moscow started to see itself as the heir of Byzantium, the Third Rome.
And that imperial vision only grew stronger with Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, or better Grozny, meaning formidable. He expanded Russia eastward and strengthened central authority, but after the death of his wife, Anastasia Romanovna, everything shifted. Convinced she had been poisoned by the boyards, the aristocracy already mistrusted, he launched the Oprichnina, a brutal campaign against nobles he believed were betraying the state.
With Ivan IV, we see a pattern that repeats throughout Russian history. Expansion and modernization tightly intertwined with fear and coercion. The state becomes stronger, but society pays the price.
With Ivan IV, we see a pattern that repeats throughout Russian history. Expansion and modernization tightly intertwined with fear and coercion. The state becomes stronger, but society pays the price.
The true architect of that empire was Peter the Great, crowned in 1682, declaring the Russian Empire in 1721 after defeating Sweden. He modernized the army, bureaucracy, navy, and he even forced nobles to shave their beards and adopt Western customs. St. Petersburg became his window to Europe. Visionary, yes, but ruthless.
The same expansionist logic shaped Catherine the Great's rule. German-born, influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, she pushed cultural reforms and dramatically expanded Russian territory toward the Black Sea and Poland. Enlightenment ideas lived side by side with autocratic and hierarchical state.
Then the 19th century hit and contradictions exploded. Industrialization lagged, serfdom kept millions tied to the land. Alexander II abolished serfdom in 1861, earning the title the Liberator. But expectations rose faster than reforms. His assassination in 1881 showed that reforms weren't enough to stabilize the empire.
Attempts at structural reform continued under figures like Pyotr Stolypin, prime minister under Nicholas II. Stolypin combined harsh repressions of revolutionaries with ambitious agrarian reforms designed to create a class of independent landowning peasants. He hoped stability would come from property and order, but he too was assassinated in 1911.
And at the center of this collapsing imperial structure stood Nicholas II of Russia, often described as indecisive and overwhelmed by the pressure of modernity.
His reign was marked by industrial unrest, the 1905 revolution and the creation of the Duma, Russia's first parliament. Political parties were legalized, but political reforms remained limited. Meanwhile, the mystic Grigory Rasputin gained controversial influence over the imperial family, especially Tsarina Alexandra, due to his apparent ability to ease the hemophilia of the heir, Alexei. His presence further damaged the monarchy's credibility.
The First World War proved fatal. Military defeats, famine, and economic collapse triggered the February Revolution of 1917. Nicholas II abdicated. Months later, the Bolsheviks led by Lenin seized power in the October Revolution. In 1919, Nicholas II and his family were executed. 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended in a cellar in Yekaterinburg.
From 1917 to 1922, Russia descended into a civil war between the Red Army and the anti-Bolshevik forces. The Red Army triumphed, and in 1922 the Soviet Union was officially established. Lenin introduced the new economic policy to stabilize the shattered economy while radically transforming society, promoting secularism, state atheism, and gender emancipation.
After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin consolidated power, and his rule defined the next era. Through forced industrialization and 5-year plans, he transformed the USSR into a major industrial power, becoming the second world power after USA. However, collectivization of agriculture led to devastating famines, including the Holodomor of 1932-1933, and this seems to be at the origin of the current difficult relations between Russia and Ukraine. Moreover, political purges, mass arrests, and the Gulag system created a real climate of terror. The state became omnipresent. Culture was subordinated to socialist realism, and art was used as propaganda.
In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The Great Patriotic War cost more than 27 million Soviet lives. After victories at Stalingrad and Kursk, the Red Army reached Berlin in 1945. The USSR emerged victorious, but devastated.
Then, the wartime alliance with the United States quickly dissolved into the Cold War. Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain, and nuclear arms raced forward. After Stalin's death in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev denounced Stalin's crimes, presenting documents from the Stalinist purges, and the thaw, or отдепель, began. Alongside international tensions, USSR and USA also competed in the space race, and the USSR launched Sputnik in 1957 and various experiments, even with dogs like Laika. And then in 1961 they sent Yuri Gagarin, probably the first man, into space. It was a triumph of science and prestige.
Yet instability followed. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly brought nuclear catastrophe. Under Leonid Brezhnev, stability turned into stagnation. Oil revenues sustained the system, but innovation slowed, dissent was suppressed, and the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 drained resources.
By 1985, the system was unsustainable. Mikhail Gorbachev introduced perestroika and glasnost, or restructuring and transparency. Economic reforms faltered, but political openness unleashed forces that could not be controlled. And then, in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved.
Under Boris Yeltsin, Russia underwent shock therapy, rapid privatization, hyperinflation, social collapse, and the rise of oligarchs. The 1990s were traumatic, economically and psychologically.
In 2000, Vladimir Putin came to power, promising order and stability.
He re-centralized authority, tamed oligarchs, and crushed separatism in Chechnya. Economic growth returned in the 2000s, largely driven by energy exports.
But relations with the West worsened. Color revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine were seen as Western interference. After Euromaidan in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and war erupted in Donbass. These tensions escalated into the broader confrontation that defines current geopolitics. Domestically, demographic decline and identity concerns fed a return to traditional values and central authority.
Well, we ended the last part at the moment when Vladimir Putin's power in Russia had finally consolidated. The vertical of power seemed unshakable. But what happened next? Did stability truly mean security?
On the surface, the system looked complete. Institutions were aligned. Opposition was fragmented. Television repeated the same message of order and prosperity. It felt like the state had a perfect control. But this is exactly where the most interesting and terrifying phase began. The state's primary weapon was no longer tanks. though they would arrive later. It became information. We entered a decade of great lies and great resistance.
If television was lulling people into passivity, as you said, then where did resistance come from?
It began online. A completely different voice emerged on the internet: Alexei Navalny. He didn't start from podiums or official debates. He started on live journal, explaining how public funds were being stolen. He translated dry corruption statistics into the language of emotion and injustice. This was the first real crack of the monolith of propaganda. In 2013, when he ran for mayor of Moscow, something new happened. Propaganda met real, live politics. Instead of billboards with official faces, there were volunteers at metro stations, agitation cubes, meetings in courtyards. It was grassroots and transparent. He received 27% of vote. That number frightened the authorities. They understood that honest campaigning was dangerous. From that moment, the propaganda machine shifted into erase mode. His name disappeared from federal channels. He became this person, the blogger, and later the patient. They framed him as a Western agent. When that narrative weakened, they turned to poison. The poisoning with Novichok, his evacuation to Germany, his survival, and his decision to return to Russia, it was an act of extraordinary courage. Propaganda tried to ridicule it as staged theater. His death in prison in 2024 marked the Kremlin's attempt to silence its loudest critic. But as we will see, what happened in Russia was only a light version of what unfolded next door.
What happened in Belarus in 2020? Why did that year change everything?
For many, it's political history. For others, it's deeply personal. In 2020, Alexander Lukashenko was running for yet another term. Official television showed a stable, satisfied society. But something unexpected began to happen. A blogger, Sergei Tikhanovsky, traveled across the country, giving ordinary people a microphone. Suddenly, the happy people from the state TV spoke differently. They were tired. A meme appeared: Sasha 3%. Online polls showed Lukashenko's support barely visible. Propaganda reacted aggressively, calling protesters manipulated by Poland and Lithuania. When potential opposition candidates like banker Viktor Babaryka and diplomat Valery Tsepkalo emerged, they were neutralized, one imprisoned and the other forced into exile. And then something extraordinary happened. 3 women united: Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Veronika Tsepkalo, Maria Kolesnikova. Their symbol, the fist, the heart, the victory sign, was powerful because it was sincere. Propaganda didn't know how to fight sincerity.
But what happened on election day?
There were long lines at polling stations, white bracelets, hope. Independent protocols later showed overwhelming support for Tikhanovskaya in many districts, but state television announced 80% for Lukashenko. Then the internet was shut down, completely, for 3 days. Imagine being in an information vacuum while your city roars outside. Telegram flickered through proxies at night. Messages came in fragments, and they were terrifying. Police beat people for simply standing outside. In the detention center on Okrestina, detainees were packed into cells designed for 6, but holding 40. People slept on concrete. Residents nearby heard the screams through the night. Stories circulated: torture, humiliation, severe beatings. It was not simply propaganda. It was terror meant to paralyze society with fear.
What happens after protests are crushed?
History itself becomes the target. The historic white red white flag was declared extremist. Independent media like Tut.by were dismantled. Schools introduced mandatory patriotism lessons. Reality was sterilized. So-called New Belarus was constructed, in which individuality was dangerous and conformity mandatory.
And then came 2022. How did everything change again?
Well, on February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In Russia, new fake news laws criminalized even the word war. The symbol Z became a political emblem elevated to near-religious status, and the language of denazification filled the airwaves. And in Belarus, state propaganda merged almost seamlessly with Russian narratives. But in Ukraine, information functioned differently. There, communication became survival. A unified news marathon, stories of resilience, humor directed at the aggressor. This was not propaganda of domination, but propaganda of resistance. So, if in Russia information acted as poison, we can say that in Ukraine it became armor.
Why is it important to remember all of this?
Because propaganda isn't just lying, it's the theft of reality. It's when your mother fears you'll be taken by police, when your historical flag becomes a crime, when on the 24th of February a classmate cries because history walked into the classroom. Silence becomes complicity, memory becomes resistance. And as long as people remember the faces in the election lines, the bruises, the fragments of truth coming through a proxy in the dark, propaganda can never fully win. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next episode.